G'day all, welcome to Math Time with Andy. No, but today we're going to be looking at inverse functions and trying to how we solve these types of questions. So, a first question as an example I've got here today is find the inverse function of each of the following. I have one example here and I'll go through a second one separately. State the domain and range of f negative 1. Just remember when you see that negative 1 at the top, that means inverse function. So just remember that. Here, f negative 1, that means our inverse function whenever you see that. Okay? So firstly, we just need to go over what our relationship is between a function and its inverse. And you can see here, I've already written very poorly the relationship. So for the function, its domain is going to equal the range of the inverse function. And the range is going to equal the domain of, with our function, the domain of our inverse function. So it's important to remember this relationship between a function and its inverse function. Okay? So we're going to look at this. So our function, it goes from 0 to 1. Only those points is where it's over. Okay? And it's all the real numbers here, so that just means it's a solid line. Okay? And the function that we're going to be looking at is the square root of 1 minus x. And you'll see here that I've already drawn, or already put it up on CAS how you can do this. Okay, so make sure you look over restricting domains. So this is restricting our domain here. Make sure you look over that so you can just see where this function starts and stops. So you'll see here that starts at, or stops at this point here. This is one of our endpoints here. Okay, each one of these is 0.2, so that's when x is equal to 0. And 0.2, 0.4, 0.6, 0.8, and 1. Okay? So you can also work this out if you substitute x is equal to 0 into your equation. Okay? Okay, it'll give you the y value, and then you know one of your endpoints of that equation. It's important to understand what these base equation looks like. So your square root of x, it's important to understand what that looks like, just so you know where it's starting and finishing. Okay? So you'll see this other point here. This is all going up by 0.2 as well. So this is actually stops at 0 because it's on the x-axis. So this is at 1 is the x value and the y value is 0. And all you need to do to figure that out is sub x is equal to 1. And these values here came from restricting our domain to 0 and 1. And it found our endpoints of our function here. Okay? So, firstly, our function, so the domain okay? Remember, domain is the x values. So, these are the x values it goes over. Alright? So this here, we can see, it starts at 0, the x values, and it goes to 1. Alright? And just take note of what brackets we used in your function, where it's restricting the domain. They're square brackets, so that means it's including these values. So our domain, it goes from, change colors, but anyway, 0 to 1. And then our range, this is our y values. This is our y values. So you look here, all the y values that this graph is touching. Okay? And this goes from and I'll do this one in green or a different color, blue. Okay, and this goes, you can see, from 1 to 0. Okay, so our range is actually 0 and 1 also. Remember, always write them from lowest number to highest. Okay, so don't write 1 to 0 here. Alright, so that's how far our range goes over and our domain. So that means using our relationship we just discussed at the start, so the inverse our inverse function, so f to the negative 1, our domain, this is equal to our range of our normal function. So this here just goes to 0 to 1. This question's pretty hard to stuff up really because they're both 0 to 1. So, and our range of our inverse, this is equal to the domain and this here is also 0 to 1. Okay, so now we've worked out our domain and range, we need to actually work out what the inverse function is. Okay, hopefully I've left enough room down here. I think so. So, just got to do this. So actually calculating or figuring out what is f to the negative 1. Okay? So this one here, all you need to do, first always state this. To find inverse, thinking about the next word I'm writing. Find the inverse, swap x and y, and solve for y. If you remember this statement, the only way you're ever going to get an inverse function wrong is just by making a little mistake in your rearranging of the equation. Okay? This is the one thing that should come to your head when you're thinking of inverse functions, as well as the relationship before with domain and range. It's all there is to inverse functions. So here we've got our function. I'm just going to scroll up so I can write it again. Here. So fx, just remember fx is just like writing y. So y is equal to the square root of 1 minus x. That's our function. So we just need to swap x and y. So it becomes x is equal to square root of 1 minus y. And now we need to solve this for y. That means getting y by itself. So first for this one, we don't have any constants at the end. So the easiest thing to get rid of here is our square root sign, and the opposite of a square root is squaring. So this becomes x squared is equal to 1 minus y. Okay. Now we've got positive 1 here, so I'll just go up here. So we've got positive 1 here, so we need a minus 1 from both sides, so it becomes x squared minus 1 is equal to negative y. And to get rid of negative y, remember you multiply or divide by negative 1. So you make sure that you multiply everything here. So I'm just going to put y back on this side. Y is equal to, so x squared times negative 1 is negative x squared. and then minus 1, so plus 1. Okay, so therefore f negative 1 x is equal to negative x squared plus 1. Okay, so that's how you find the domain and range of inverse functions. It's always good to have a quick graph of them when you are finding your domain and range. Okay, if you don't know what exactly the graph looks like, use this method by subbing in those values there. Okay, so just be familiar with that process, and hopefully this allows you to be confident in working these. Okay, so just remember the two things with inverse functions: this relationship up the top here. Okay, so the relationship between domain and range and the function in the inverse, and this horribly written sentence here. Ooh. Okay, so find inverse, swap x and y, and then solve for y. Okay, and that finds your inverse function. So that's all there really is to know, and I'll do another video on another example. So hopefully you all do well, and good luck.